Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the second Aparté event presented by EY. Aparté is a conference series that aims to dive more into the human side of entrepreneurship and inspiring conversations with creators. Thanks to EY for making these great conversations with entrepreneurs come to life. Today, we're happy to present a conversation with Ashkan Karbas-Fushan from Watch Mojo, with Michael Bloom, Senior Manager at EY Private, on the subject of balance and entrepreneurship. Over the past 20 years, Ashkan has helped build most successful content brands in the consumer web industries. First, AskMan, and now Watch Mojo, top 25 largest YouTube channels of all times. He will share his entrepreneurial journey in the media and entertainment industries and his perspective on the constant quest for work-life play balance. Enjoy the conference. Profitez bien de la conférence. Now, here to Michael and Ashkan.
So the theme today is balance, good versus evil, risk versus return, capitalism versus socialism. I guess some of your words, Ash. But before we get into all those details, maybe tell us a bit about yourself and how did you come to start Watch Mojo?
Sure. So in the context of balance, very briefly, I was given my last name. You may be wondering, I was born in Iran in 1978. 83, moved to Spain for a year, and 84 came to Canada. So my upbringing was very much Canadian, Western culture. Studied, grew up really into the humanities. I always tell entrepreneurs, like, it's not actually just about business or technology. Oftentimes when you want to solve problems and you want to bring people together to support a collective goal, I assure you, you will be using psychology, sociology, anthropology, and mainly history quite a bit. So when I went to university at Concordia's John Molson School of Business, I studied finance, and I really thought that I would pursue a career in investment banking. But if you graduate in 1999 and the dot-com bubble bursts, the NASDAQ crashes, and that's followed icing on the cake with 9/11, the reality is Wall Street banks were not exactly lining up to hire Ashkan Karbas-Fushan, who graduated from Concordia University in Montreal. So as I was kind of sitting there, I was working for Royal Bank in customer service for Visa. It was a job I loved, but I wanted to move to Dominion Securities, which was like, Canada's version of, Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. And I was doing such a good job in customer service that the bank didn't want to refer me. So one day, out of the blue, there was a company called Mama that reached out and said, we need somebody to help us in their accounting department. And no disrespect to you, Michael, but if you're a finance grad, being offered a job in the accounting department is not exactly what you envision doing, right? And so I actually spoke to my older brother, who at the time was a consultant. And I said, look, I really always wanted to do a couple years in a corporate landscape before figuring out if this intranet thing is going to last. And he said something that stuck to me, and if you fast forward to 2021, it's somewhat true. He said, look, Ash, in the future, people still called me Ashkan, by the way, but he goes, look, Ashkan, he's like, we're all going to work in this new frontier eventually. So if you kind of bypass corporate and go work at a startup, it's not exactly crazy. It's just like a different path. And I kind of leaned back and I said, you know what, you're right. So I had basically just short-circuited my trajectory, and I let go of these assumptions that I had about what my career should look like. And I started working at Mama, and Mama gave me a wonderful opportunity, a front row seat of this internet revolution, seeing what was happening in search. Mama got Googled. I came across Google very early, and I said, this company has just this awesome technology. It's backed by this tremendous investment group, and their founders seem to be really smart. And what I realized was I love technology, but I was more drawn to media, and I loved startups. So a couple of guys that I'd gone to school with at Concordia, they had started an online men's magazine called Ask Men. And I was really yearning to actually be like both a storyteller and an executive. I love to write. So I joined Ask Men in 2000 and spent 5 great years there, and realized I was more of like a storyteller entrepreneur. I loved writing articles. I 1,000 articles, published a couple of books. And I really like that storytelling side of it. And then ultimately, when IGN Entertainment bought Ask Men, I was 27 and I had an entrepreneurial bug. And I decided to launch Watch Mojo then, 16 years ago in end of 2005.
Okay, so that's so going on to that, like the launch of Watch Mojo. Maybe you could. I think you have a reel for us, but you could tell us maybe a bit what do you do exactly at Watch Mojo, and what does Watch
Sure.
Mojo do?
What does Watch Mojo do? Great question. So in 2005, the landscape was different. There was this little idea called YouTube. So YouTube and Watch Mojo, incidentally, we registered our URLs at the same time. Mind you, they took a very different approach through aggregation of content, a video platform. And so what I ended up kind of recognizing is, Michael Milken, who is a very famous and successful investor, he has a great line about how the best investor is a social scientist. And so at that moment, I kind of said, okay, if I'm basically effectively serving as the angel investor and founder, what are the opportunities? I could see that one, storytelling was shifting to video. That was just a reality. Video was starting to gather steam. Two, I could also kind of, as a very competitive person, I knew that I was not going to reinvent the wheel and build a better version of an online magazine through text content. I just felt like, okay, even if I kind of nail everything and it's a perfect eclipse, realistically, it will still not be a best of breed world-class brand and business because it's been done. Articles is yesterday. Not that it's going away, but I'm not going to have a competitive advantage there. Three, it was still early, but you could tell that like this little device, which today is a rocket ship, but at the time you could see that we're mobile. Back then it was a paperweight. It was like there was a ringtone. Maybe you had a flip technology. It was obviously very rudimentary. But I mean, if you look at the evolution of any technology, you were going to kind of connect the dots, and you maybe didn't know who was going to win. You didn't know if YouTube was going to beat Rever or Daily Motion or MetaCafe, and you didn't know that Apple was going to come out with the iPhone, or if BlackBerry or Palm or Samsung was going to dominate, or Nokia or Ericsson. But you kind of knew that, hey, success in this world is the combination of content, editorial, programming strategy, and that strategy has to fit the distribution reality of your era, right? Today, if somebody came to me and said, how would you go about, it would be a very different strategy than the way I had to go about. So when we started with Watch Mojo, the idea was, hey, storytelling, if you read the great book Sapiens, storytelling is really what separates human beings from animals. We can tell a story, we can captivate people. It's led to some tremendously horrible chapters in history, such as the Holocaust or other forms of genocide, where a leader close to it, not to compare Donald Trump at all to Adolf Hitler, but there were parallels where a charismatic leader who can manipulate the media can basically whip up support for causes that may not be altruistic. But ultimately, the point being that I just felt like storytelling is going to be shifting online where the audience is in a short form with audiences that have tremendously little attention span. And I felt that there was this massive amount of history, people, places, things that mankind is either interested in, nostalgic about, for whatever reason cares about, to go discover or recover the way information is found, discovery and recovery. But I knew that an hour-long documentary on World War II may not be what a 14-year-old kid who is on the internet right now would want to sit through. So what I was doing is I was basically saying, look, I could figure out the information that we need to cover. I could figure out a lot of the pieces, but I believed in comparative advantage and principle of specialization. I had to go out and recruit people who were studying videography and video editing, and being in Montreal, that is in our DNA. And we're doing this series at Zoo, you have to play to your strengths. So I started to recruit a team, not as a knock to the CBC or BBCs or the ABCs of the world, but just that we're not necessarily trained in a certain way, who were going to come and say, Ash, I could help you tell these stories, but it's got to be 22 minutes or 48 minutes. I purposely wanted to recruit young, smart people who, like me, had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, but who were good team players who could basically pursue a common goal. And you know what? I'm a very fiery driven individual, but I was very consensus seeking. So, I wasn't necessarily saying we have to do this content or we cannot do that content. But the same way that you tinker and the same way that you kind of like iterate until you find your product market fit, and content, I refer to it as platform format fit. We started Watch Mojo with this kind of, vision to inform and entertain audiences with a video on every topic, knowing that eventually, like every other media company, we would have to narrow the editorial and really, really focus on one or two things and do those really well.
Well, especially back then, like in 2005, everything was an experiment. Like the landscape back then was very, very different, as you were mentioning. So I don't know. Do you want to play the video reel?
Yeah, sure. Let's go. Let's do it. Want to make sure we have the audio.
Hi, I'm Samuel L. Jackson, and you're watching Watch Mojo.
I've been feeling kind of cooped up. I'm trying to get some fresh air.
Welcome to Watch Mojo.
No way!
That's amazing.
Countdown
And you ain't got a flash when you're taking your picture. You ain't got to drown no extra retention. Paparazzi wanna shoot ya. Time for less out here.
You got a great voice.
Hey everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome to Watch Mojo.
And today, we're counting down our picks
For the top 10
for the top 10 horror movies of 2019.
This is the big one.
This is the big boy.
I've been in my bag anyway. Trying to throw a bag in the safe. You can turn in the base. Baby, Milo wants some baby names.
We did not obviously invent the format. Before us, you had Wayne's World, Letterman, and the OG of top 10 lists, Moses.
So you say I'm not even in the top 5?
I didn't say that.
What?
She's saying that.
This whole thing is stupid.
I can't be riding that open strip. I need tents. Windows, I need tents. Windows tint. I can't be flying down that one tent. With the bag in my whip. I need tents. Windows tint. I need tents. Windows tint. And it's no good for me. It's so good for them. I need tents. Windows tint. I need tents. Windows tint. I've got way too much to lose. So move your window up real quick. I need tents. Windows tint. I need tents. Windows tint. You know I like a presidential. Stretch it out, that's a limo. Pull it up and let me get behind you. Where we going now? I need to know. Ghost riding in the phantom. Never see me coming. She wanna hold me like a ransom. But the money keep me running. And all I've been in my bag anyway. Trying to throw a bag in the safe. You can turn in the base. Baby, Milo wants some baby names. Time for less out here. Do what I gotta do, bruh. Get up in my rearview mirror.
You have such a soothing voice, and at night sometimes I watch your videos. Not that they put me to sleep.
So that's a fun little video recap of Watch Mojo. Some impressive numbers, some impressive viewerships now. So maybe like you already started touching on the subjects a bit, but outside of Watch Mojo, what I found interesting, it was a bit different researching you personally also before coming to talk to you today. But outside of Watch Mojo, you're also an author of books, entrepreneurship, leadership books. You're a producer. You wrote, I believe, 33 Lessons in Greatness, The Confessions of Alexander the Great. You have 10-year overnight success. You produce Fox in the Henhouse, a documentary, also an hour format, which is very different than your typical what you do at Watch Mojo. It's a story a bit about balance as well, the theme of today. Also, it seems like a lot of maybe inspiration that you have about these books came from a very young age. Like your story about reading your encyclopedias in your home, that moved over from reading about history, the Holocaust, then after over to Alexander the Great, on which you theme the book. To see it feels like he's one of your heroes, and it feels like you have a unquenchable thirst for knowledge, like personally, just like on personal growth. And while I was reading this, it feels like you writing, it feels like this is a way of you giving back and getting that balance of learning and sharing back with the community. Maybe you could maybe I'm totally offside here,
No,
but maybe you could give us
there's-
some insight on how this all came out.
Sure. Lot there. So, I mean, look, the universe functions as a function of balance. If you think of gravity, if you think of the poles, if you think of just everything, there's always a counterweight, right? So, balance, though, is not, I want to be very clear, balance is not something that you just are always in a state of zen and nirvana and kumbaya. It's like this. It's this journey to a place you never reach. It's you're struggling based on your nature. Like if you think of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you have nature. You're born and you have a certain, internal DNA and a pedigree that whether you recognize it or not, eventually is kind of like simmering inside of you. And then depending on your trajectory, you then have nurture, and then you have a certain upbringing, like education and experiences, good and bad, that you become every day the sum of. You become a reflection of everything that's happened to you. So, like even you mentioned Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is the most influential secular figure in history. I wouldn't say he's like a hero as much as he's a fascinating warning lesson of how your blind ambition could totally, get you to these tremendous heights that nobody before you might have experienced. But he died at 32, 1 month shy of his 33rd birthday, which is not exactly how he probably wanted to, head out, head off the stage. So it goes back to balance, right? That struggle to basically find like this medium between your ambition and your drive. But in now, if you have to bring that forward to like the 21st century, the reality is, especially in Western cultures, we do live in like rather materialistic, societies where some of us are driven more by, wanting power or wanting, money. Others are driven just by accomplishment and success. Others, it's just by respect and credibility and whatnot. So I think the key that I want to emphasize is, yeah, totally. Like if you want to be successful, why was Google so successful at the internet? Because they were scouring the internet and then they were sending traffic out to other websites. And it was this weird contrarian thought that by sending traffic away, maybe over time we will aggregate more traffic, right? Instead of a walled garden where you just keep everything inside. And then, so we talk a little bit about balance, we talk about nature and nurture. And then the other one that people don't talk about, 15 years ago when I started WatchMojo, a lot of investors did not want to invest in WatchMojo just because they were not comfortable with content. They did not necessarily feel like that content was, defensible. It was not intellectual property the way that they viewed intellectual property. But mainly they didn't like content because they didn't think it would scale the way technology scales. It's fine, water under the bridge. There was still a lot who did want to invest. But the main, I think, thorny conflict when I would have discussions with them is I was emphasizing everything that now even the biggest, most hardcore capitalist is embracing, which is, yes, you do need to be driven by something other than profit. Profit is great because it gives you stability, foundation, strength, and independence, but you need to be driven by principles and purpose. I was saying that, they would roll their eyes, which was fine. They were in the business of managing capital. It needed a little bit of a long-term vision to buy into that. Call it a 15-year vision. It's fine. Then I felt like, you could not, in clear conscience, build an organization that was ultimately a for-profit endeavor and only care about the stakeholder, that is, the shareholder. I sincerely believe that if you prioritize your clients and you prioritize your employees and you prioritize the community that you serve, then you will create value. And then as a shareholder, you will get tremendous benefits. This was madness to people then. Today, it's basically the foundations of conscious capitalism, inclusive capitalism, progressive capitalism. It's all semantics around this concept of just a greater good, a greater calling. So when I would talk to investors, they just didn't really love that like Ash is not here to just serve our needs as an investor, which takes me to the next pillar, which is this concept of servant leadership. Servant leadership is nothing radically crazy. It's just basically not putting your self-interest atop the pyramid, the hierarchy of needs and wants. Servant leadership just means like, hey, if you like to cook, you want to make sure that your family is fed and your guests are having a good time before you sit down at the table. You know what I mean? But like in the business setting, it means that your clients are safe and your clients are happy, your employees are safe before you ask, well, what's in it for me, right? So 15 years ago, when I was kind of, for lack of a better word, preaching this stuff, or just saying this is my position, agree or disagree, it's fine. We could either partner or go our separate ways. It was a bit weird, right? So to answer your question specifically, I am effectively capturing, summarizing, and Watch Mojo is a curation. As we give you the top 10 best movies to watch this year, we're summarizing, we're curating what's out there. I'm basically just distilling everything that I've learned and everything that's helped me be successful. And I've had my share of failures. Michael Jordan says I succeed every day because I fail every day. I would order different food from what I just ate. I would put on different shoes. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot that we do differently from our lessons. And I think we're kind of conditioning people to be very stoic, to be like, well, if I had to do everything all over again, I would never do anything differently. I'm like, really? You would do nothing differently? I wouldn't trade anything to be where I am sitting here right now. I love it. It's a beautiful room. I'm talking to you about a topic I enjoy. But even though that is a sum of every decision that I've made, it still is a bit like lacking, candor to say that, well, like, why wouldn't you learn from the mistakes of others? And so that's why I distill history, and that's why I distill, I like to read a lot and just kind of pack it into, hey, here's a condensed version for you, right? So I feel like in the next decade, if we were to sit here in 2031, we're going to be talking a lot about things like psychology, like talking about communication, talking about sociology, talking about history. We had a teammate that left our team about a few months ago or a year ago. Time flies. Yeah, it was a year ago. And, when we sat down, I'll refer to them as they, just for keeping it somewhat confidential. So they were telling me that, they had a great run, but they kind of, wish they would have done more. And I basically said, look, now that you're leaving, I'll be kind of candid. I go, I really, really think that a lot of the issues that we may have had, even though we had a great run together, boil down to a lack of communication. And I'm like, I could be faulted for talking a lot, but I listen a lot. And I could be faulted for writing long articles, but I read a lot. But I was like, here, I'm like, I really went out of my way for many, many years to try to sit down and talk to you and get out what it would take to make you more happy, to make you more successful here. Was it really us, me? And they cut me off and they said, no, I've had this challenge in my personal life to open up with, say, for example, siblings and loved ones and parents and cousins and all that. Watch Mojo was just another counterparty that kind of I did not open up with effectively. And at that moment, I kind of felt like I failed because I said it was actually up to me as the de facto leader to work on communication as well with this individual, right? So I feel like if you fast forward what's happening now with the pandemic and all that, I feel whereas a lot of it in corporate environments, you're like, hey, let's not bother people to pry and ask about what's going on in their head, what's going on in their, what is their nature, what is their nurture, what is the situation that they have. I feel like that kind of empathy and that kind of just understanding, hey, if somebody replies to you in a way, in a tone that you're like, this person is trying to ruin me, it's not about you. Maybe it's about them. Maybe it's their wretched reality. Maybe it's their, trauma, and that is making them incapable or unwilling of communicating or collaborating. So I feel a big area where corporations are going to care about more is the stuff between your ears. And like as I transition from just an entrepreneur executive to also an advisor and an investor, it doesn't matter if somebody came to me like Ash in 2006 and said, I'm going to launch this company, Watch Mojo, doing A, B, and C. I almost don't care about what A, B, and C are. I care more about the person. I'm like, what is this person doing? How do they view the world? How do they solve problems? And so, so all to say, absolutely, in terms of that servant leadership, in terms of that greater good, if I can help somebody have a better life, avoid the painful years I had early on where I couldn't make payroll, it was a constant struggle, where everybody was like, Ash is an idiot. Why is he producing videos for this YouTube thing? Where today everybody is basically, screwing each other to build their presence on YouTube and elsewhere. But yeah, if I could basically just capture all of the lessons in my life, the failures and the successes, the highs and the lows, to help others, you, the other person, the person listening, become successful faster, then I believe, maybe naively, that then they will be in my position to be more quickly able to help the next generation. Because you alone cannot do everything you want to do. It's like that proverb.
That's
if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe on that line, on helping people, you also launched the channel Context is King. Okay, so its mission is pretty bold. When you go on the site, it says the site provides basically weekly content about complex and diverse fields of business, entrepreneurship, science, technology, and it's really to give entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, executive roadmap and a blueprint on how to succeed. So it's touching on that theme of giving back, helping people, looking people as a person. What really pushed you to create Context is King?
Sure. So, the channel on YouTube is ContextTV, and then the companion website is contextisking.com. And we're going to launch, whether it's a podcast, we've started on Clubhouse, Context Matters, but all around this context theme. So what is the purpose of context? Very simple. You know how Andreessen Horowitz, the legendary venture firm started by Mark Andreessen, they recently said, we're going to launch a content arm. It's basically marketing. It's basically just to share our worldview. In many ways, context captures the essence of what I look for in entrepreneurs and human beings. And me just distilling, hey, you could do it your way. You may have tremendous success in work. You may have tremendous fun in play. You may have a great life. But if you want some kind of balance that is very subjective, relative, and fluid, whether you want it to be more of one or the other, this is a roadmap. I would never call it a blueprint because a blueprint is rigid, but this is a roadmap of things that work for me and things that work for others. And I'm going to basically bring it down in a way that goes above just market share and valuation and financing and all of the noise that you generally hear externally. And I'm not knocking Business Insider or TechCrunch, which are tremendously successful pioneering publications. But the idea is, by the time you read about a company's or a person's success, it's almost too late. It's not really what led to their success. The stuff that you could learn from happened years, or it doesn't need to be years or months, forget the construct of time, but it happened far ago, long ago, and that never necessarily gets out there for you to extract and apply to your reality. So what I'm doing, because I don't want to say don't care in a disrespectful way. What I mean by don't care is I don't, like others, necessarily have a board that if I were to come out and say, man, I made a big mistake. I had a meeting with a counterparty. We discussed an idea. It was this project. It was this concept. I assumed that they would not kind of take the idea and do it themselves, but they did. We now have to decide, was it an idea that maybe is gone, or was it a project, and should we send them a letter that we're going to chase them, but it was a mistake the way that I trusted them, and I'm going to open up about it because I feel there's a lesson for you. No sane executive will admit that because they're afraid that somebody's going to come and second guess them and second judge them and say, well, maybe you should not be the CEO because you demonstrated poor judgment. So I'm a bit more willing to open up and say, my God, here's the top 10 mistakes I've done this morning already. You know what I mean? And context, because I have a thick skin, but because I go, look, if the people that didn't believe in me 10 years ago, they may think I'm foolish for opening up. But if they were not supporting me then, I almost don't want their support, and I shouldn't care about it. But we are all driven by insecurities. So, what are those and how do those manifest? And then as an entrepreneur, the reality is let's be candid here. Entrepreneurship, like, let's go back 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you all of a sudden started to have the discipline of management, right? Before that, you would have studied some other field, and you would then gravitate towards business, because in business, it was like concern, and you needed to kind of understand revenues and losses and assets. And then eventually you had the discipline of management, and then you had all these schools prop up, the management school at McGill, or the John Molson School of Business and Harvard, and et cetera, et cetera. And then over the 20th century, management became a field that you go into, and then, you could argue, well, is an MBA worth it or not? But it became an actual discipline. Entrepreneurship, 40, 50, first of all, entrepreneurship has always existed. Jesus Christ was an entrepreneur. Alexander the Great was an entrepreneur. He, Genghis Khan, he was like, I'm going to gather all these horses and all these soldiers, and we're going to go around and destroy other people's villages until they, follow me. Today, entrepreneurs are like, I'm going to get a bunch of designers and coders, and we're going to go hack the world and save the world and make it a better place. But the drive that gets individuals to not be content sitting there, sedentary, to become known, to go to the lands and conquer foreign, land. It's not that different than Google saying, we're going to basically, launch Google Video. Oh, it didn't work. We're going to go buy YouTube. Same concept. Fight me or partner with me, right? The point I'm getting at is entrepreneurship 50 years ago. You had a crazy guy like Richard Branson. You had a demented guy like Rupert Murdoch. I'm saying this all complimentary, who were like, I'm going to go out there and walk to the beat of my own drum and not necessarily follow this playbook that somebody has given me and said, I got to follow that. But if you fast forward to 2021, kids who go to school, they don't want to be doctors. They don't want to be bankers. They don't want to be lawyers. And then at the late 90s, many of them wanted to work on Wall Street or be venture capitalists or investment bankers. Today, kids look at Mark Zuckerberg. They look at TikTok. They look at Instagram. They look at Watch Mojo, maybe, hopefully, and say, hey, I want to be doing this. And frankly, as an investor, I am drowned by the number of entrepreneurs and opportunities, because this is the new normal. But entrepreneurship to be taught in school is a bit weird. It should be taught in school, but you learn it in the school of hard knocks. And so Context, what it does is it essentially takes all of my experiences, all of my conversations, all of my kind of analysis that I've done over 20, 30 years, and it just kind of puts it in a format between audio, video, and text that is there for people to use if they could get value out of it. It's not so much like a blueprint, it's again a roadmap. Like, hey, you're gonna make these mistakes. There's no doubt about it. These are mistakes that are typical. If you read about this before the fact, maybe as these balls of fire are coming down the hill, you could dodge certain ones or find a way to take a negative threat, weakness, and turn it into a strength or an opportunity.
Okay, that's good insight. Also, I guess that's a bit about you touched on your path as an entrepreneur and challenges you faced in the past, and so you had your challenges of like people trying to shut you down at the beginning. You have a family, you have 2 kids, like a lot of people. Still challenging to balance everything with that. Also, so maybe you also wrote about yin and yang principles, the importance of creating balance for all stakeholders. So I'm kind of trying to bundle everything together here. Even early on in your career, you were talking about as a principled person, that you had some people that challenged your principles, and you couldn't necessarily feel that you could push or share your principles of creating balance for all stakeholders here in your life. So maybe talk about some challenges you faced, and maybe that's one, trying to create balances to your stakeholders. And now, because as an entrepreneur, you can actually drive that balance as you see fit.
So, okay, I think what you're alluding to, and I admit there's a lot, I have a lot of interest, but I think what you're alluding to is in 2005, when Askman got acquired by first IGN Entertainment, and then IGN Entertainment got acquired by News Corporation Fox, I did what I thought was the right thing to do, which was I wasn't going to play turf battles. The right thing to do was for me to fold my functions inside of the greater organization that had acquired us, instead of saying, I demand this and I demand that, and if you do this, I'll do that. It was just like, I need to kind of get out of the way. But I also did have this growing entrepreneurial drive. And I kind of went to them and said, look, I'm going to be launching a startup. And they said, look, we don't care if you launch a startup, but just don't go work for the competition. And when I started Watch Mojo, literally 15 years ago to the day, I got sued, a frivolous injunction. And, their goal was, I think they knew that they didn't really have any ground on the merits. So they wanted to shut us down through expensive litigation via an injunction. And, I'm a good student. I like to debate. I probably would have pursued law if O.J. Simpson would not have made me hate law for a while as a teenager. And so, seriously, the O.J. trial made me go a different route. And so when I was speaking to lawyers, they basically were like, look, you would probably prevail at the merits. You have a good argument, but their goal is to outspend you. And I felt that was a very, very crass, it was like a very cheap tactic by them. I had not made that much money, so it wasn't like I had to choose between just taking whatever money I had to pay to lawyers to defend me, and then I'd be out of money, and I'd kind of like left them alone. So I did feel it was really like cheap. Now, I again forgive, but I don't forget. So the lesson is not for me to poop on anybody. It's like it was their insecurities and their, lack of, empathy that led to it. But tremendous lessons. And again, I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. What are those reasons? Let's get into it. One, what I realized was like sometimes you really have to just not get emotional about things. If I would have gotten emotional, I probably would have killed myself, whatever. I ended up just going and studying injunctions for 48 hours, and then I went to court and I destroyed them, like annihilated them. And so what that did was it gave me so much confidence in in future possible litigation. I was basically staring at like the then president of the Bar Association, who's now a judge. And frankly, we had a good case, right? I was a layman. That I could beat such a tremendous lawyer had more to do with the merits being on our side, but also me being willing to study. So the first thing I learned is don't be afraid of the law. And as an entrepreneur, people are going to use the law sometimes. Sure, if you do something wrong, but if you didn't do something wrong, because maybe it's intimidation. So you have to be able, if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's not like Alice in Wonderland. It's hand-to-hand combat every day, people fighting for the spoils. And if you don't have that in you, it's going to be hard because entrepreneurship is hard. Nobody owes you anything. Nobody owes me anything. You have to fight for it. Two, what I really realize is like people always complain about the law is this, and it's not. The legal forum, it actually makes sense. It's not perfect. Lawyers are not necessarily, there's good and bad of everything. If you say all lawyers are bad, it's as ridiculous as saying all Iranian Muslims are bad. It's not right. It doesn't make sense. There's good lawyers, there's bad lawyers, there's ethical and unethical people. But so what it taught me was not to get afraid of frivolous legal threats. So that fast forward a few years later, when I basically, with Watch Mojo, our origins were producing content, cooking videos, travel videos. We used to cover everything. But eventually we made 4 big bets. One of them was recognizing that YouTube was going to be groundbreaking and going all in on YouTube. The second one was recognizing that we needed to focus a bit more on a given format. And, like I said, we did not invent the top 10 format. Letterman, Wayne's World, Moses and the 10 Commandments, the OG of top 10 lists. It was a format that mankind had always liked and been drawn to. So we said, you know what, let's create content in this format because it's easier to digest. Third, we recognized that kids who were growing up, who were reading comic books, were now decision makers on Hollywood, Madison Avenue, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley. And they would basically start to bring in this geek culture into mainstream. So when we would do in 2008 a video on the origins of Batman, on YouTube, there was no content on Batman. So kids who eventually go on YouTube and search for Batman and get to see top 10 Batman moments, top 10 moments when the Joker goes crazy, our content would stand out, and it did. But then the fourth bet was I was crazy enough to embrace copyright, fair use, and say, look, fair use, which is an exception to copyright, saying if you create parody, commentary, criticism using short amounts of longer works in a way that does not adversely impact the marketability of the underlying work, so purpose, amount, impact, and nature, pain, if you respect those 4 tests of fair use, then you could create commercial business around fair use. Those 4 bets were ultimately what led to our success. But when at first I would get the odd rights holder who would come to us and say, hey, you shouldn't be using our footage, I would say, well, hold on, let's have a conversation. This is the law. These are the cases. If you have other cases to share with me, I'm all ears. Time and time again, there would be no cases that they could present because the cases and the law was on our side. In the back of my mind, I was like, man, if I in 2006 was willing to go up there and represent myself and win on principle, I am pretty confident that I will be able to weather the storm. And so over a 10-year period, we went from that to today, all of those rights holders are our clients and partners. Half of them, if not most of them, have wanted to invest and acquire WatchMojo at one point or another. Again, it does boil down to principle. Let's go full circle. What's my nature? Why did I start off saying I was born in Iran? I viewed fair use always as an extension of the freedom of expression, as an extension of the freedom of the press. We had Donald Trump in the US. I said Donald Trump was going to win a year before he was even chosen as the nominee of the Republicans. Why? Because Americans like to be entertained more than informed. But that's a parenthesis. But let's say Donald Trump gets reelected and he goes now to Disney and says, hey, Mickey, if you don't produce basically a propaganda that says Donald Trump is the greatest human being in the history of life, we're going to basically shut you down. I wanted to retain the right to be able to dissect that movie and say, no, this is false. Donald Trump is not this great person. He puts kids in cages. He does these horrible things. So for me, it's always about a principle. It's always about a purpose. I would say the key is in 2005, because I was being sued by News Corporation, which is Rupert Murdoch, I had to, like David and Goliath, I had to use the weapons that they were pointing at me and turning them against them. If I would have let my emotions get the better of me, ergo, if I lacked balance, and gone overwhelmingly and said Rupert Murdoch is this and defamed anybody, I would have lost. So I still had to come up with a counterforce that was within the limitations of, like, let's say, the rules of engagement. In the 2010s, if I would have gone out and responded with overwhelming counterforce against the rights holders, the movie studios and the record labels, who were attacking us frivolously, they would have maybe let their emotions get out of their way, get out of control, and come to us with just litigation to weaken. But I held my cool, and I was always a statesman and saying, look, I believe the facts are on our side. I believe we are not doing anything wrong. I come to you respectfully to say, correct me if you have cases. And they would back down because they were like, this kid knows this stuff and he's not like going out there and saying stupidities either. What is interesting is I see as I evolve, WatchMojo being bigger, we cannot lack awareness, balance. On YouTube, I tell my team, we're the scrappy unknown startup nobody's heard of. We got to keep working hard. We got to be humble. Clearly, that's not the case. We reach 150 million people in 150 countries. You, by coincidence, happen to know our files extensively well. We're clearly not an unknown startup that's starting. We're an established business, but we still conduct ourselves like we have everything to prove. But what I understand, though, is we now find ourselves in a situation where, holy moly, we are now the one that is not necessarily being hunted, but when people basically kind of do things that are in bad faith, or when people, let's say, lie and steal, whether it's an employee, whether it's a partner that acts in unfair competition, I realized the irony of going, wow, we're now the hunter. If somebody crosses us, Ash the individual is #blessed. I am good. I have no problem. But Ash, the CEO, has a fiduciary duty to many stakeholders. And this is the irony. My next documentary is called Paradox, because I cannot believe now that I have to kind of like play a different role in this theater of life, where Ash, the individual, may not feel like, well, we got to send them a lawyer's letter, but Ash, who represents shareholders, let's say investors, employees, everything maybe needs to be a bit tougher, right? And that's paradox, and that's part of balance. But balance, again, is not, I want to be very clear. I joked last night on Twitter, on LinkedIn, when I told my daughter, my 10-year-old daughter, I said, oh, I'm speaking on balance. She turned to me and was like, you? Really? I was like, yes, my dear. Really. I love her intelligence and her charm and her wit. I said, balance does not mean that when something bad happens, you just keep it in and you're like, everything is great. Balance actually means letting yourself, expressing yourself, sometimes through articles, sometimes through just a yell, sometimes through a tweet, but sometimes just like being in the shower and just like letting the water hit you and just, wash away like your anger and all that. Balance is going through the range of emotions that once you gate and you go through, you find some kind of equilibrium. To say, yes, I'm human. Last week, literally about a block away from here, I was driving by a cop that had stopped a car. Because yes, there is racial profiling. Cops don't have it easy. Not all cops are bad, not all, but cops, sometimes there is a little bit of racial profiling. So I have a tendency to always look in the car to go, have they stopped a black person? I won't lie, I'm very candid and very transparent. And as I drove by, that's not why I'm alluding to it, but as I drove by, I caught a glimpse of the people in the car, and they were young kids. They were like 22, 23. But I noticed the cop, as I'm driving by now in my side of my eye, I'm like, oh my God, the cop is putting his hand on his gun. That's not standard operating procedure. And as I'm now getting to the red light and stopping, I see the car taking off, the cop flying. They're now all in my rear view mirror. And before I know it, boom, they hit my rear driver's side rear. We get jolted. My other daughter, 12, soon 13, is in the back. I go, are you okay? She's like, yes. The car then kind of backs out, drives off. So I now kind of just pull to the side. My first reaction, I'm human. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. My first reaction, a bit of shock. I go to my daughter, are you okay? You're good. You had your seatbelt. I go, this is why we wear our seatbelts. Great. We're now in a safe spot. I get out to inspect the damages. I see the back is damaged. My first reaction, swear word. I then look, the cops had pulled the passenger out. Now they're dragging him as the other guy drove off. The cops are taking the passenger into their station car. I yell at him like something like, you're a loser or something. Then right away I'm like, Ash, you're a grown man. Like, this guy is, maybe he's a bum or whatever you want to call it. And I'm using that in quotation mark.
Yeah.
This guy is not in a position he wants to be in his life. Like, he already finds himself in a bad situation where it turned out they had stolen a car, they're resisting arrest, they did a hit and run. He doesn't need me to remind him that he's a bum or a loser. I need to get in my car and focus on my daughter and only my daughter.
And that's it.
But as I sat there, because I was like, look, I'm kind of a witness. I mean, I saw the guys and whatever, we were involved in a hit and run. So I'm like, I should wait to talk to the cops. I could drive off. I'm like, I have insurance. We're safe. We are going to be okay. But what position are these kids that they have no better alternative? Now, some people were like, wow, you have such great perspective. I'm like, sure, but I do have good perspective because we're blessed. I grew up in Iran where there was war, there was a revolution. We complained in the last year about having to work from home and having to wear a mask. I got a news for you. All over the world, that is called Tuesday. It's called Friday. There's famine. There's lack of, right now, Texas, my heart goes out to them. Forget that Texas makes fun of everybody else when it happens to other people. Maybe they'll learn their lesson. But you still have to empathize with them. But that is how other people in half the world live all the time, right? So my point is, to answer to my daughter and others, yeah, I'm human. I go through shock. I go through a bit of anger. But then very quickly, I gain perspective. And that is what balance is. It's like when you step on a scale, you kind of, the doctor goes over and then they find where you're at. So balance is not being kumbaya. Anybody that is constantly namaste, zen, life is good, they're, in my opinion, ticking time bomb. Or in the context of work, life, and play, they're emphasizing, let's say, more life. maybe they're not as driven or motivated in work. But if you're a highly, highly driven person and you've always looked at life through the lens of work, then something like context, to bring it back together, puts work in the context of work, life, and play to gain some kind of balance where, you get hit by a car, if your colleague sends you an email, you don't take it out on them. Or if your daughter, let's say your other daughter goes, hey, does something and she's just being a 10-year-old, you're not like, oh, stop and go to your room because she's being a 10-year-old, right? So that is what I mean by it's a journey. It's this never attaining destination that actually changes based on your new reality. And sometimes you as a person need to take stock of how well you have it, but also how your situation has changed.
So take a step back, look at your situation objectively, and that's good advice for overcoming your challenges. So we're gonna go to the audience questions soon. So maybe just in 1 minute, Ash, before we go to the public here.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah. So in 1 minute, what's next for Ash and Watch Mojo?
Look, I love my job. I've had an opportunity many, many times to sell the business right into the sunset. I get to have my cake and eat it too. The company is profitable, we're sustainable, so it's frankly, to keep it short, I have a great team. I have a fantastic team. They do a lot of the day-to-day. I'm basically like there to solve a problem they have or just to help them, do things better. I'm supporting them in the day-to-day. It's really giving back in other ways, helping other entrepreneurs. I want to get more involved in policy. Like we need to create, for example, more jobs, better education for more young people so that they don't end up like those kids in the car that end up making a profoundly horrible mistake of resisting arrest, stealing a car, doing a hit and run. Like if I could help a kid a week avoid that fate, I'm good. The rest is great.
You're good. Fantastic. So let's go to a question that we have from the public. Okay, the way you connected the dots, anticipating the way media would expand to portable devices, iPhones, etc. When you started work at WatchMojo was impressive, so a compliment. Today, in the middle of the pandemic, would you invest time, money, energy in a venture in the physical world, or you believe that definitely entering that we're definitely entering deeply in a digital era?
The best investor is a social scientist, so you want to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. Now is the time to actually invest in things like that at the right price, the right project, and the right team, because human beings, go back to anthropology, we don't want to be alone. We've always, for millennia, we've always drawn to community. That will not change. And also, there's fear of missing out. Right now, little Joey is working at home in his pajamas. He's happy. He's living the life again because the alternative is this. But next time when he's being left out of discussions and left out of meetings, he'll say, wait, I don't want to be working from home. So throughout history, there's always overshoot, and then there's a regression to the mean. So I actually think that if you take into consideration how the pandemic will accelerate trends that would have happened anyway, I feel the right physical projects make a ton of sense. What I would not do are, so again, the answer is always it depends. What I would steer clear of are the projects that almost pretend like the pandemic did not happen. So things that accelerate the trends of the pandemic, but take into account, if you zoom out timeline of history, that mankind's always been into community, gatherings, psychologically doesn't want to be left out. Yeah, so the answer is it depends, but absolutely just have to, pick the right people and learn from history.
Gonna fall back. Tell us about a failure that was a great learning point in your career.
I have so many failures that I don't know, but I thought that would come up, so I'll tell you one. I wouldn't call it a failure, but a lesson. So something I regret, but I had to go through it because I was always too, people that don't know me are going to say, did he really say this? I'm too unselfish. I never really think of like, hey, I want to do this, let's do it. I'm always like making sure everybody around me. A few years ago, I hired a lot of people. Like we doubled the team and we really reinvested in a lot of projects. And I really, really didn't do anything that I wanted to do. Like I really just basically poured a lot of that money into things that others really wanted to do and things that were creating jobs for others. And I really just shelved a lot of like personal projects that I probably left to my own devices, wanted to and should have done. And look, I'll be honest, you know, other people took some of those projects that I was discussing and you know, didn't do them with me. So I would kind of, it was like a double whammy where we invested a lot, hired a lot of people. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. And in hindsight, I should have understood that, hey, you know, you have a great team. You're here because of your great team and because overall you've been an unselfish person. But you should really start to prioritize things that you really want to do instead of always thinking of, hey, everybody, you know, I not to brag, I'm a pretty good soccer player. I'm a tremendous striker. I put the ball in the net. You know, some people are good starters, some people are good closers. I have a team. We have a lot. It takes a team effort. A striker, you don't score if you don't have an awesome team. I realized, like, hey, man, I should really, really stop de-emphasizing what I want to do and not necessarily, like, the floor's open. Anybody can talk. If I'm driving off a cliff, tell me to stop. If you have a better idea, I'm very collaborative. And that's the key. I don't change my principles, but I've changed my tactics now. So now I'm a bit more like normal, where I'm like, yeah, no, I don't, that's great for you. You do that, but I'm not going to take this pile of cash and give it to you for you to burn it and not show any results.
So basically, keep true to your focus and what's true to you. Like, get your top, maybe not a top 10 like Watch Mojo, but top 3.
Yeah, I mean, don't assume that, look, I would just, this is a bit harsh, but people need to hear it. Don't assume that people share your principles, but don't also assume people share your drive. People don't necessarily have, and when I say I mean ones. You can't assume that people have the same drive, the same ability to execute, to close. You know, there's a lot of people that are sometimes lazy. There's people that just don't really put in the hard work. And that's not your fault. You know, the same way that like your success is not your doing only, your failure is not your doing only, but sometimes some people that are not happy with where they are in their life, it's not you, it is them. And so you have to be okay with that. But I see we have another question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I actually, maybe you could read it. I can't see it. It's too blurry. Maybe my bandwidth dropped too much. So.
How do you see the future of Cirque du Soleil in the context of COVID? So disclosure, it would be I think unethical for me not to say this. I used to pitch Cirque du Soleil quite a bit on producing a live production inspired by Alexander the Great. And again, Alexander the Great is a flawed character, but I felt like something that was more globally well known. And I met them. I felt Cirque du Soleil was tremendously limited in terms of being a one-trick pony. You know, there's emails and articles predating COVID. And I was like, Cirque du Soleil should be like Disney. It's not Disney. It will never be Disney because they are sticking to the one thing that prints money. And so I always felt like Cirque du Soleil had to diversify. They didn't do it before COVID. There's a new ownership group. And also, Watch Mojo could be guilty of sticking to what works, although we obviously are always trying to experiment. So I'm not blaming them. It's human nature. It's innovator's dilemma. It affects everybody. But so with Cirque du Soleil, I was always pitching to them to expand into becoming a full-fledged media, I called it 247-365. Not just like, ooh, I'm going to go see a Cirque du Soleil show one time in Montreal or when I'm in Vegas. Like to really build programming, to build content. And I always felt that like the IP that they were producing was both too abstract, but also not supported with other forms of storytelling, meaning it was hard for an audience to understand. Whereas when Disney produces a new IP, it's supported in a 365 way, 360-degree way, where at least it could live on different places, right? So Serge, now I see the name, Serge, of course. Wow, blast from the past. Sorry. It was blurry. I couldn't see that. I remember Serge very well. Serge was actually, I met him on a very interesting project years ago. In any case, so what I would hope is that basically live entertainment will come back. But the problem is it's obviously not going to come back like 9/11 where it just builds up the day after and progressively. Some people are psychologically not going to be comfortable being outdoors, et cetera, et cetera. But I would like to see Cirque du Soleil just evolve into more of a diversified media company. And even if they don't listen to any of my ideas, nobody ever listens to me. That's fine. That's why Watch Mojo was successful, because it was maybe one of the few ideas people didn't rip off from me.
Yeah. So one last question asked from Diane. what's your number one advice for anyone who is thinking of venturing on their own with an online business during the pandemic period? Go or no go? Wait?
Look, the answer is always go, but you want to be careful not to drive too fast. Like the key is, the answer is always it depends, by the way. So it depends what the online business is, but not knowing what the online business is. You don't want to be 6 steps ahead. If you are too early, it's as good as being wrong. So you want to be 1 step ahead, maximum 2 steps ahead of consumer behavior, right? Watch Mojo, I'll wrap it up with this, was in the 3rd wave of content producers. And there's a ton of articles on contextisking.com about that. Watch Mojo, if we would have been same tactics, same team in the 1st wave in the late 90s or in the 2nd wave in the early 2000s, I would not be sitting here. It's because we were just a little bit early, so we kind of timed it well. And success is vision, ambition, execution, persistence, luck timing, focus, and resiliency. So when it comes to timing, it depends what your business is. If it was like a little bit early, go for it. If it's super like 8 steps early, maybe slow down a bit. And if it's a business that no longer makes sense because of COVID, then don't do it. If you're entrepreneurial, it's a means to an end. Come up with another concept.
Okay, great. Well, so I guess that ends the session or the luncheon today. So thank you very much, Josh, and have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. It was a pleasure. I hope the audience enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashkan and Michael, for this interesting talk. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. I hope you had a great time. See you next week for the future of programming with Bruce Hills, president at Just for Laugh, Myriam Achard, new media partnerships and public relations at Phi Center, and Nick Farkas, senior vice president, booking concerts and events at Evenco. Same time, same place. Be there. Merci. Bonne journée.